Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 5, The Siege of Skyhold, chapters 53 through 56. In these chapters, it turns out I was right to be suspicious, but I had my eyes on the wrong person. At least in the short term, I had my eye on the wrong person. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat, and Dan, I feel like you said that there was a particular moment that made you want to commission the series. Was it this? I felt like you said it was in book 5, but I can't remember if you ever specified. I thought you said 5 though. And yeah, you guys, this was a really, I hesitate to use the word fun turn of events, but I'm gonna. It's not fun in that it's truly tragic and terrible, but it's just not what I was expecting. And I should have, all the signs were there, the very last section that I talked about, I was kind of like, Alustin, bruh, what's up? And yet, I was so certain that he was able to, that he was getting what he wanted via Kanderon, in terms of fighting against the Havathi, that I just thought that would be enough to sort of keep him in line. And instead, we find out that the affinity he has, that he's developed, the artificial one, is an ink affinity. And it's really weird because when I was listening to the part where the guy with Valia touches the book, and it for lack of a better way of putting it, the book bites him. You see the blood seep out and the writing become part of his skin, and then he turns into a book. It took me a few minutes to really understand that what had happened there was the library defending itself. And I thought for a moment that the words from within the book he had touched were attacking him because Alustin was controlling them. So I thought for a moment, wait, did he develop an ink affinity? Is this his power and we're seeing for the first time? And I thought that would go really well with paper, I guess. And then because it's never really mentioned and because Alustin doesn't seem to take credit for it, I realized, oh, okay, I think that was just the library doing what the library do, and finally put it together with the people who have vanished before that turned up as books. And I was like, oh, okay, I see what's happened there. But I had a moment of thinking that he had developed an ink affinity. And it turns out I was right, but not at all the way I was thinking. And I wasn't aware, of course, how dangerous that kind of affinity could be for what it is we've got going on here. And I am particularly devastated that he knew that Hugh would suffer and it was a price he was willing to pay. And I know that it wasn't the pain that Hugh felt was temporary. It was what he was feeling through the bond with Kanderon, I'm assuming. But he put Hugh through something so awful and traumatizing just with the pain. And then it's compounded by the betrayal. And I can't understand how I can't think how Hugh is gonna like get past this. You know, he is such a sweet kid that just wants to trust, and this kind of betrayal just doesn't even feel like a strong enough word. I'm trying to think of something that's more, that really gets to the heart of the kind of damage that this action would do to a person. And I can't even think of an adequate word. But it is I hate to see this happen to Hugh. Everybody else, of course, Alustin was their mentor too. But with Hugh, he lost his mentor, who was like a parental figure in Kanderon, and Alustin, who was a sort of, I'll say, uncle figure. What do they call that? Avuncular? He was the guy who reached out to Hugh initially and taught him so much that helped him like break through the difficulties he was having. And he's lost both of them today after this. I mean, the only other person who can come close to understanding is Godric, which, you guys, I was not ready for Arthur's death either. And I'm going to like start at the beginning. I'm not going to just do this the whole time where I'm jumping around. But because it's the end of the book, I feel like I can do a sort of wrap up commentary before I get started. And I'll tell you what, I didn't quite realize what it was that Arthur was doing until the line where it says like Talia had to watch as Arthur died. And I was like, as he what? I just don't. I was just like, oh, he'll just make it. He'll be okay. It's Arthur. He's just tough. He's like a fucking boulder. Like, you just can't do anything to him. And when I realized this is it, y'all, I was like genuinely shook. And I was driving, listening to the audiobook, and felt myself tearing up and was like, I gotta not cry while I'm driving, please. Cause it's not great. I was not ready for that at all. So, Dan is offering the word treason, but treason feels so political. What Alustin has done to Hugh is very personal. You know, this is a betrayal that's like on a level that I can't imagine, because it feels so planned out. It's one thing to have a person betray you because on the spur of the moment they make a bad decision, or they take somebody's side because they're misunderstanding a situation or don't really like believe in you. Those are all things that are sort of, they are personality things more than anything. And they feel like stuff that you could actually run into in your life, and people have, and it hurts, and it's a betrayal, but it doesn't feel like this premeditated, cold-blooded kind of plan. And that's what really fucks me up about it, is that he was going into I don't know, I'm sure it's mentioned specifically, but I don't recall how long ago it was that Alustin found out what Kanderon was up to. I know that the letter that he tore up and see sort of, I'm going to say taped back together, even though that's not it. He was reading it after rereading the letters from his sisters. That was the letter about what she's really up to, which he isn't even sure where the letter came from. And that for me is like the biggest suspicious part of all, is how he has decided, oh yeah, I'm going to believe this. And I'm like, I understand that he knows that somebody probably was trying to get him to go after Kanderon in the moment. But even if he doesn't, they all still turned against her and did what they did, which is, in my opinion, it's got to be what the whole point was, really. Like, you don't deliver a letter like this and have everybody aware of what she's pulling, and you don't intend for a complete mutiny. And it feels like he walked right into something, and they are all certain that Kanderon was betraying them. And it doesn't sound as if they ever even like had a conversation with her about what was in the letter, because they weren't supposed to know about it. So they like had to play their cards close to their chest, which I understand that, like, in the sense that you have to be careful how you step, but I don't understand going on the information from an anonymous source to then completely devastate the entire council is dead. Kanderon is, if not dead, in like pretty severe hibernation mode. And for whom? Somebody set this up, it feels like to me. And I am not convinced that all the information he's been operating with is totally correct. Or at least was presented in the context that would make it more understandable. I'm going to start at the beginning now. We're backing up to chapter 53. And we find out that Heliothrax has a dragon affinity, which, because she herself is a dragon, means that she can make some really wild body modifications on herself. And apparently this is something that, like, when people are born with an affinity for the species they themselves are, the body mod stuff can pretty quickly lead to death. Like, people will fuck themselves up and wind up killing themselves. So it's something that you have to be sort of cautious with. But she has some information that's like really ancient that she found that nobody else had access to. And all of the information in there about like creating bigger, stronger, more badass dragons is what she uses to sort of fuel the spells that she employs to change her own body. The sunworm had the durability and regeneration of a hydra, the reflexes of a naga, and 1,000 other modifications. She'd given herself an extra pair of wings and far longer, more dexterous talons. Her scales were the next best thing to indestructible. Her bones were even stronger yet, and Heliothrax had rearranged and reshaped her entire skeleton inside of her to better reinforce her body. She never tired, flew more swiftly than anything else that relied on wings, even ignoring her magnetic propulsion spell, and was immune to just about every known poison. Those rare few she couldn't make herself immune to, she overcame with biological filtration mechanisms. She even had a dozen of additional senses, ranging from thermal vision to the ability to perceive electromagnetic fields. That is dope. That is so badass. Truly amazing. I love this so much. And Kanderon is like, and that's just the shit I know about. You know, what else has she got going on? Apparently, her ability to procreate has been affected. As far as we know, she hasn't been able to have a viable egg. But it seems like she's pretty much effectively, like, immortal. And Kanderon is, like, losing and trying to figure out what she's going to do. And then she realizes, oh, I can just make myself incredibly fucking huge and heavy and slam against her. So she does this. And Kanderon, in the midst of this attack, is demanding why. And Heliothrax says, I think that the Havathi are right in that, you know, history favors their side of things. And Kanderon is like, yeah, that's not fucking why. Tell me the truth. And Heliothrax says, you're no better than they are. You serve the same masters they do. Which I thought was a really interesting, like, what does that mean? Who are Kanderon's masters? What is that? I thought she might have meant for, like, her coven for a moment, but I was like, that's not, the coven isn't her masters. That doesn't make sense. I serve no masters, Kanderon said. I've allied myself with a different faction of their organization, just as Kieda and others have done. You are willing to serve the exact same faction who guided the Ithonian Empire. And so Heliothrax says they learned their lessons, and this was the part that I was like, word? Havath is imperfect, but it's not the monster that Ithos was or that Ithos forced you to become. The monsters that Ithos forced us both to become. I've kept your secret, but you bear just as much responsibility. You were the one who retrieved the Oblivion Stone from off-world for the Splinter's heart, so tell me, why have you really joined them? And this is when Heliothrax is like, oh, you just said that shit right here so that everybody heard it. Well, I guess I may as well just go after your fucking storm mages. Kanderon is like, all right, I'm going to get real with you. There's a rumor that Andus Thune has driven you out of your lair. And I didn't think that he was a threat to you, but it seems like maybe that's what's going on. And Heliothrax says, it takes a minute because she gets real mad and then recovers and is like, he hasn't driven me out. He's hidden it with his illusions. Havath's illusionists have promised to restore it in exchange for your head and the exile splinter. And Kanderon is like, wow. You just want your lair back? Really? That's enough for you to fucking... And I can't help but think it's not. She's still hiding something. Part of me is sort of like, what if Heliothrax did succeed in an egg that was viable? And he has basically like taken her family hostage or something. Because this just feels like it's not in proportion. She's really mad at the fact that Kanderon zeroes in on the lair being taken. But it may just be that she got a little too close to the truth and she never actually hit the truth. I don't know. So finally, Kanderon feels Heliothrax like do this spell that is so beyond anything that she has ever felt before. And this shit, it's like enough for everybody to sense it. So we jump out here to chapter 54. I hate this so much. So we're back with our friends, and they are noticing that the sandstorm died and that the Eye of Heliothrax ended. And they're all sort of like, that's interesting. Maybe it's over. What should we do? And they run like to an area where they can see out. Let's see. Here it is. Godric's armor might never get as powerful as his Daz, but now he had the chance to train himself in whole new styles of combat magic. The four of them met little resistance on their way out to the nearest balcony. Talia's Dreambolt hadn't seemed to do anything. This is an attack for a guy, other than stopping him from moving. Then they realized he'd been transmuted into a bronze statue inside his armor, which is pretty wild. Like, amazing. Ugh. Horrifying, but amazing. And this is when we jump into Artur's POV. So he has killed Tarsanax, and he feels the sandstorm end and, you know, the eye go away. And he's looking around like, what is happening? So the Hydra was approaching, and it wouldn't be long before it reached the graveyard of ships. It was half covered in glass, enough to build a whole palace, and yet it still moved, as though the impossible burden meant nothing to it. And this is when he sees the whole coven battling Heliothrax and losing, and he is like, oh my god, we gotta do something, we gotta do something. So he seals his armor, and we get him running full out because he is thinking, if Heliothrax or the Hydra gets to Skyhold, that's a wrap. And my son is definitely going to die. So he is fully motivated to go as all out as it is possible to go. So he's running, and he isn't going fast enough. So he firms up the sand underneath him, and he's still not going fast enough. And then he takes off the head of his armor and just lets it fall. And it's like, all right, maybe this is fast enough. If with every bit of force he could summon, Artur tackled Heliothrax off Kanderon. And he yells for Kanderon to run, which she does indeed do. I sort of thought she might argue, but she doesn't. And I have like really mixed feelings about that. A part of me is like glad that she didn't, because he was clearly attempting to do something very specific here to sacrifice himself. And if she argued, I don't think this would have worked. And it, like, I think that it was the right call, but there is a part of me that can't help but just be like, man, she just straight up took off and left him and didn't put up any argument. Ugh. So he yells up to Heliothrax, I've got something to say to you, to which Heliothrax is like, give me a fucking break. I've heard all the big speeches that people give when they are on the edge of death, and I don't even remember them distinctly because they're all the fucking same. And he says, no, I just needed to make sure Kanderon got away. I stole this trick from my son. And he has his arms and legs wrapped around her leg. He taps into the otherworldly enchantments that hold a mountain of iron, one covered in colossal twisted spines. As Heliothrax's claws tore deeper into his armor and the enchantment on his hammer collapsed, Artur Wallbreaker began to laugh. All Talia could do was watch as Artur Wallbreaker died. And you guys, I wasn't ready. I was not ready. And what kills me is that Heliothrax isn't dead. I was hoping that at least his sacrifice would result in her death. But it isn't. That's not what happened. They think she's gone. And we get this particularly cruel moment, y'all, where I thought maybe Artur had made it after all, because the mountain of iron begins to move. And I'm thinking, oh, look, he's going to like struggle out of it, and maybe he isn't going to survive that much longer, but he still gets like one last moment with his son, something. But no, it's fucking Heliothrax that's moving, that gets out of there. And Talia is like watching Heliothrax and is ready to go. She stands up and she's like, fuck this bitch. I don't care. I'm going to go after her. The coven flew between Heliothrax and Skyhold. Kanderon Crux, with her immense blue armor cracked and broken, Indris bleeding and exhausted, barely staying in the sky, Ilian Kandas hovering surrounded by simple spheres of wind instead of her usual storm giant of clouds and lightning. And Heliothrax turns and flees. And then they realize the Hydra is also still alive. And then we get this moment where it's sort of stretching weirdly. And Kanderon says, it says, this new body is far more magnificent than the one you promised me, Kanderon, the Hydra said. I owe you a future favor. I apologize for taking so long to seize control of it. Thank you, Raymel, Kanderon said. Wherever you go, go knowing you have earned my friendship. Is Raymel? Raymel's not the puppet, right? Who is Raymel? I feel like I'm supposed to know who this is, and it's not ringing a bell. I didn't get what was going on here. And, I guess I could have probably done like a word search for Ramel's name in the Kindle book. I didn't even think to do that. But I just felt like I appreciated the idea that was what was happening here, but I didn't know who this was. Eduardo says the chained ape. Okay. Wild. So that body was like external, but not actually necessarily who he was, because it sounds like the body that he left wasn't his body. Like, this new body is far more magnificent than the one you promised me. What's the one she promised? What was it? Is like, I genuinely want to know. Ramel is the chains. I didn't get it. Okay. Weird. So Ramel's consciousness is inside the chains, and he was moving the ape by being in contact. Oh, that is a weird scenario. Okay. I don't even know what to make of that. That's the weirdest idea. All right, I can't afford to spend too much time on this right now. We're going to move to 55. And we have Sabe talking to her grandmother, and this is a sort of interesting conversation. Elenia is like, girl, I could tell that you've had some shit on your mind, so what are you going to say to me? And Sabe is like, I want to know how the fuck you sleep at night. And she's expecting her grandmother to be like, well, I do it for the good of everybody, and the lives that I end by my own actions are nothing in the, grand scheme of the lives that would be lost if I didn't do anything. It's not what she gets at all. Elenia says, it's 'cause I am a monster, babe. If I had a conscience and I let that rule me, Rhysandus would fall. And I always tried to find a different way. When I was young, I really thought there was a third option. And once you become a great power, you're locked in. You just can't find a way out just having the power. It's like you don't really get a choice about opting in. The simple fact of accumulating that power is what buys you into the game. And she's like, this is the deal with the way power is distributed by nature in our world, which is super unequal. And I could sacrifice my family, or I could sacrifice my conscience. And I'm frankly a lot more okay with my conscience than letting all of you guys die. And that's why I fucking drink so much. So this is when Sabe is like, I'm going to end this. I'm going to rip this apart. And her grandmother is like, yeah, that's the spirit. And Sabe is like, you're fucking not taking me serious. I mean what I'm saying. So Elenia lifts her into the sky and uses a ward for them to not be overheard. And tells Sabe, I am never going to have an heir. Nobody else can know this yet. But here's the thing. There is no one in our family powerful enough to take the seat after I'm gone. I've hoped and waited that we would find somebody that could manage it. Simple fact is, once I'm gone, our family is going to fall, if not completely enough. And I have to live with knowing that. So if you're able to break the games and keep them from continuing the way they have, then maybe that can help your family as well. Like, keep things from falling into chaos. But you need to know what's at stake, because I don't have somebody waiting in the wings to take my spot if something happens to me. And I should have a couple of decades at least before you have to worry about it. But it is something to keep in mind. And I thought it was interesting because Sabe is expecting, when she says I don't have an heir, that she says, like, I wish you could be my heir, but you can't. And Sabe is like, because my magic is all messed up. And she's like, no, because I just don't have any. So I liked the moment where Sabe is thinking like it's a shortcoming of her particular type of magic not being the same. And instead, her grandmother's just like, no, straight up, I am a genius and I'm very gifted and I've lifted us farther ahead by far than anybody in our history. But it is unsustainable. Like, we can't keep going at this rate. So, this is when we go to Alustin's POV. And this is such a wild scene because it's, the vault that they're putting the splinter in that opens at midwinter. And there are all these different objects that he's looking at that are incredibly powerful. And the way these are described is unnerving. I do appreciate this pair of boots, which we had heard him mention at one time, how much harder to cope with they are than they sounded like. And the last egg of an Isendarin queen is here. So that's interesting. Just, wondering if anything's going to come of it. And this guy's an acorn the size of a man's head floating in a hellish brew of alchemical poisons that just barely kept it from sprouting. A silently screaming child made entirely of teeth pounded at the inside of her case with her gnawing fists. That... No. Unacceptable. Rejected. Will not allow it. Please edit that out, Beers. Okay? Just no. Absolutely fucking not. No. No. So... this is when Alustin says, any one of these could destroy the city. Fucking do it. And Kanderon is like, they're doomed in a decade. I'm not doing that. I did it once before and destroyed a city. I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to be responsible for that again. And there's this moment here where she says, most of all, and she just sort of what's the word I want? Trails off, I guess. And she says, I refuse to repeat my great sin. Oh, that's right. The first one that she says is, I would be giving birth to a whole new generation of people bent on revenge. And then Alustin says, is that really it? Or is it really just that destroying Havath City would break the rules of your centuries-long game against Havath's masters for influence on that damn council you both sit on? The one I'm not supposed to know about. And she says in response, I've given you my answer. Because I know from personal experience how it feels to crave vengeance as badly as you do. I will forgive your words this one time, and this one time only. Now leave before you say something you'll truly regret. And I thought it was really interesting that she doesn't pretend to not know what he's talking about. She doesn't attempt to defend herself. She doesn't seem really very abashed at him knowing even. It's more that the way he's throwing it in her face here is the problem, more than the fact that he knows this information, which is part of what sort of makes me feel like he's got some bit of info on this wrong. If this were really meant to be as completely secret, and if it were as self-serving a deal as he is making it out to be, I feel like there would have been more surprise, more shame, more defensiveness, more lashing out to shut him up. There are people listening and watching when he says this, and she doesn't seem to be concerned about that at all. And that's the part that keeps kind of tripping me up, is how almost calm she is when, she's angry, but she's not reactive. So Alustin is taking some deep breaths because he's so angry. And he starts working on a spell form in his head. And he reshapes the spell forms on Hugh's armband into a new malevolent configuration. We jump back to Hugh and his friends. Godric is finally asleep, and everybody had just sort of been with him until he fell asleep, which this is like the hard part of a friend who's lost somebody, is there's nothing to be done to help. You just have to help them get through this horrific, crushing grief, which takes a long time. And unfortunately, some of us can be very impatient and want our friend to get better and feel better at a rate that's unreasonable, or want to be able to help keep them from being sad, as if by making them cheerful temporarily, we're helping them get over it. And that's just not how grief works. So you just have to be there for somebody in a way that's the most important thing. But if you are an action-oriented person like me, for example, can feel very similar to doing nothing. And I just really understand how awkward this must be for all of them, because this is a really awful situation. Everybody loved Arthur, everybody knew him, and the way that he went down to save all of them, really, this is going to be a tough road. So Hugh is talking to Sabe about what they're going to do next, and basically is I committed to you to helping break the great powers and making the system different, but I have never meant that shit more than I do now after everything we have just been through. And Hugh is in the midst of agreeing to something Sabe wants to suggest, which I don't think we ever find out what it is, and then hits the ground, and he is in such horrific pain, and he can feel that Mackerel is also in this horrible pain. And then it abruptly ends. And I was sort of thinking that this was actually physically hurting him. I knew that it was the pain was an echo to a degree, but because the last scene had ended with Alustin altering what was on his armband, I sort of was does this mean that he can physically hurt Hugh with it, So Hugh asks Sabe to get them to the council chamber as fast as possible. Understandably, initially Sabe is we got to get you to a hospital, bro. Look what just happened. But he's no, swear to God, that's not what it is. And I can tell, please get me there. And we get there. Then it says the council chamber was full of corpses. Anders Velsirov's memorable silk robes draped a body without a head. Edin slain lay cut down among a pile of his ceramic tiles. 4 other bodies Hugh didn't know lay sprawled around a glowing column rising from the center of the council chamber. The column was some sort of portal to another place, slowly closing as the great metal seal of Skyhold descended. And he sees Kanderon and thinks she's dead. But then he realizes she's breathing and runs to her. And I'm glad, at least, that she's able to tell them what happened. Because, like, it would take a while, if she weren't alive enough to relate the story, for them to realize Alustin's, like, nowhere to be found and begin to put any of this together. Which is a real oversight on his part. I don't know if she faked being actually dead, or if he, like, I don't know. But she tells him it's Alustin. He wanted revenge, wanted to use a weapon from the vault to destroy Havath City. I refused. And Kanderon says, it was my fault. I built our pact wrong. And Alustin had an affinity that I didn't know about. When you wrote to me from the labyrinth, I wasn't positive you were who you said. And we find out, you know, when the mentoring about making pacts came up with Hugh and the first year students, they asked him why, like, how many clauses were in his contract. And they said the average was something like 4 or 5, and his has like 20 something. And he was thinking how odd it was. And we find out here, she did all of that to protect herself in case Hugh wasn't really who he said, or was aiming for something different. And because she put all of these clauses in, it made the pact a lot more brittle and vulnerable to manipulation than anybody really knew. She was pretty certain that Havath didn't have the information necessary to exploit this. But, of course, never even considered that Alustin would want to attack her, never mind the fact that he had developed this ink affinity in the first place in order to affect it. And she says that I should have redone the pact and made it simpler and thus stronger. But I was waiting longer than I needed to for you to prove yourself to me, and I really should have trusted you sooner than I did. And it turns out Alustin stole the tongue eater from the vault. And it is, as she puts it, a stomach that stores dead languages. Alustin is going to use it to inflict the cruelest vengeance he can imagine. He's going to set free every language it's ever devoured and drive every single citizen of Havath permanently insane. And Sabe is like, what the fuck? That's way worse than anything Havath has ever done. What is he doing? And Kanderon's like, yeah, not only that, but it's really possible it's not going to be just Havath that's affected by it. Like, we don't know how this is going to work. Nobody's just opened that shit up and dumped it out. Like, it could spread and make the entire world nuts. Who knows what it's going to do? And here's the problem. It is so valuable, the tongue eater, that if anyone finds out it even exists, never mind that he has it, the kinds of things they will do to get it, you can't imagine. So you cannot let anyone know that's what he's out here working with. Like, even the Ithonians were not aware of really the value of the thing. And it's a weird moment that I didn't understand here, where she says, I should have told you the truth about our bond. I should have modified it to fix the vulnerability long ago. I was afraid to hurt you. I couldn't bear the thought that you might think I didn't trust you. I didn't want you to hate me. And I was just sort of like, if you like came to him and you were like, hey, because I wasn't sure who you were, I built some like things into this that I think now we can do away with. because I've gotten to know you better, I don't see how it's even close to a worry and concern that he's going to hate you. This was the only part of this that I found genuinely unbelievable. Hugh is a very understanding person. And if the very fact, if she were reaching out to him to be like, hey, we should alter this, is in itself her proving that she trusts him more now, that he has proven himself. So I felt like this was really, really counterintuitive and didn't totally make sense in terms of a motivation, because it's just illogical. And Hugh, while he can be like very emotional and self-loathing about certain things, I don't think he would have any trouble understanding where she was coming from on this at all. It just feels wildly out of character to me that it was even a concern to her. I don't buy it. So that's the one thing about this that is like bothering me, is the whole way that Alustin's betrayal worked out. I totally buy that, but it only works because she didn't change their pact, and her reasons for not changing it do not ring true. So that's my issue here, is like the reasoning behind this. It just feels like it doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. I feel like maybe if it had been maybe that the pact couldn't be altered, or there was something within it that she felt like, I decided to keep this even after you proved yourself because of other reasons. I feel like there was a way to make it believable that she decided to keep the pact as it was, without it just being emotionally like, because I feel like what Bierce is trying to do here is be like, Kanderon was so emotionally attached to Hugh in a way that she didn't anticipate, that she didn't want to hurt him because it was going to be like a vulnerability, and it's meant to show the humanity in her, for lack of a better way of saying it, even though she's not human. I understand what he's like getting at here in Hugh being her weakness because she cared about him so much. But this way of doing it just feels wrong. Kanderon's like emotional attachment to Hugh, if anything, to me would be what motivated her to make this change rather than otherwise. So I don't know. Even if it were like there were a vulnerability built into the pact that only Alustin knew about, and she says here like that he did, but that anybody else, if they had like gotten more details about specifically what the pact said, could also have exploited it. But I feel like if we had just left it as, I had this pact with you that had a weakness, I didn't think anybody would find out about it, and once it was made, it couldn't be unmade, it couldn't be altered. Does that seem like unlikely in the universe that Bierce has built? Maybe, but if he said that that was a rule, I would accept it. But he wants it to be motivated by how much he cares about Hugh, instead of it being motivated by the rules of magic. And while I understand wanting that more emotional motivation, it doesn't actually work, because I feel like the reality of it would work the opposite way. So anyway, that's my hang up with this, is just I get what it was that he was attempting here, but it just feels like he caught himself in a corner a little bit, you know? And it's not like a cardinal sin. It's fine. I'm not going to harp on it too much after this point, but I just really wanted to, there's always things like this when I can't really even think of things that I've read where there isn't a moment where I'm kind of like, okay, everything sort of hinges on this one thing, and that one thing feels really weak to me. I've come across that in almost everything I've ever covered. Like, there's been some exceptions, but for the most part, I can see how this happens. If an author has a plan for how things are going to go and they need a thing to happen and they want it to be like to work out a certain way. So I understand that. And because I really don't think that I could necessarily do that much better as a writer, I don't want to be like a dick about it. But there's always, this is the thing that, like, for example, in Harry Potter, which I will always be comparing this to, there's the scene where Harry finds out about Snape actually being on their side by extracting Snape's memories while Snape is on his deathbed after being bitten by Nagini. And Nagini, or Nagini, however you want to say it, as a method of his execution doesn't make any sense. Like, Voldemort would have just Avada Kedavra'd Snape and that would be it. But we can't have him just be Avada Kedavra, or else Harry doesn't get his memories. So you have to have him do something that really, in context, doesn't make any sense in terms of what we know about Voldemort, because we have to have this massive reveal thing happen. So, you know, I just feel like it's funny because Bierce had nobody really knew about this vulnerability except Alustin, and he says it, and you could have just left it there, but he had to add on, and it could have been altered, but I didn't want to because I didn't want you to be upset. And if you just deleted that, this plot hole wouldn't be there for me. But he needed to, like, pull heartstrings, and he weakened the whole thing by doing it. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have been so suspicious of Kanderon that I have not let myself believe the relationship between her and Hugh. So I think that's also a part of this for me, is that she has felt like she's keeping so many secrets that as much as I believed that she cared about him, I also believed that she was hiding a lot of shit. And both things can be true. People who care about you can sometimes be the biggest sinners in terms of hiding shit because they think they're protecting you. So I like side-eyeing her constantly, which results in her being like, I just didn't want you to be mad at me, falling even flatter, I think, because of that. I want to feel the bond between her and Hugh from Hugh's perspective a little bit more. I want to, like, believe how much he cares about her, and I believe it intellectually, but I have been waiting for the other shoe to drop and been sort of like defensive on his behalf ahead of time to a degree that makes me at this point still feel like, Hugh, you were too good for her anyway. Like, is she thousands of years old and unbelievably powerful? Sure. But she was sus and you deserve better. And that's sort of where I have been coming from. So I'm really interested to find out more about this thing that she had going on that Alustin is accusing her of, because I had been thinking there was something more pushing her and that she was keeping other secrets. But I'm also now suspicious of the information he has and whether or not what he had pictured is really what was happening, because he thinks that she was after personal ambition. And I am sort of wondering if she was trying to make a deal that was going to lead towards the breaking of the system. And he simply didn't have enough info to know that, because why would she tell him? Because it wasn't any of his business, frankly. And, you know, who would tell him about that deal she's got going on, but one of the great powers that doesn't want anything to change, you know, like that's a really handy way to sort of keep that from happening. So anyway, the whole thing here is it wraps up this scene with Sabe's grandmother, Alinea, coming in and her pretending that Alustin actually took plague vials and he is going to like unleash the Blue Death, which is one of the things that killed a bunch of her family, including her own father. And her grandmother is on a mission now to track him down, thinking this is what he's got a hold of. And it's a good choice to make it a disease, since the tongue eater is sort of like, seems like an infection in a way. But I have my eye on Alinea Candace. Like, part of me is sort of wondering if she wouldn't have sent that information to Hugh. And because she straight up called herself a monster. I'm just saying, she seems cool and all, but she does do some brutal stuff. And if she's really worried about the way that power works, I mean, seeding this doubt and fomenting a mutiny would be the way to do it. I don't know. So this is when Sabe is like, all right, Hugh, that thing I told you that we should do, we got to start it now. We can't lose any time. And she asked for Mackerel to start the anti-scrying thing so that they could begin it. And I was like, what in the hell does she have planned? I genuinely don't know. So then we go to Alustin, who is really surprised that this whole thing worked as well as it did. And we find out he hadn't developed the ink affinity for anything like this purpose. His original intentions for it had been entirely different, but it had been the perfect tool for this job. What does that mean? Like, what was he originally going to do? And is it something that he can still do, or is this done now? And like, the original plan just got set aside for something better. And this whole thing, apparently Eden Slane, the ceramic mage, had been trying to like lock Alustin into a kind of tile prison to stop him because he spotted what Alustin was about to do. But Alustin got some paper into the cracks right before it was able to really seal shut, and that was how he got away with everything. And that I wish that we had gotten to see that scene a little bit, but also glad we didn't. And he is meeting all of these other librarians errant. Among them are Emerson Dries, and I think he's like mentions that Captain Bandon is the one who gave him the letter in the first place, so I'm assuming he's like part of this as well. But there are enough of them because they all sort of turned on Kanderon at the same time when they realized that she wasn't planning on completely destroying Havath. And the ones that didn't were taken care of, and it made to look like they just died in the field, you know. And let's see. There was no group of people alive who hated the Dominion more than the librarians errant. When they had discovered Kanderon's betrayal a year and a half ago, discovered that she intended to merely neuter Havath, not destroy it, they had turned against her almost as one. And Alustin had no idea who had sent him that letter. It had been delivered by Captain Bandon, invisible on the back of a young dragon, but even he hadn't known who had sent the message, just that it had been smuggled to him with the correct codes. It revealed her plans, her centuries-long struggle to penetrate the shadowy multiversal organization meddling in Anastas's history. Alustin had long known that Kanderon was involved with multiversal powers, but to find out she was holding back from punishing Havath merely for her own advancement, to betray the memories of the dozens of librarians errant who had died in the battle against the Dominion, all for more influence? I don't know, that sounds right, man. her struggle to penetrate the organization meddling in Anastas's history, that sounds like she's trying to get to the bottom of something bigger. Like, it doesn't sound like she's just going, I want more power. It sounds like she's tracing back events to a greater source. And she has to be in this position in order to do that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just giving her too much credit. It's wild how I've been so suspicious of her, and now I'm over here just like giving her a million benefits of the doubt. But it's too suspicious, this info being given to him this way. And I'm baffled at how willing he is to run with it, even though he seems to know it has to have been an enemy that gave it to him. And every avenue of information he pursued after receiving the letter just confirmed it. I mean, it would, though. If somebody is able to give you this information, why couldn't they set up the people that you need to speak to about it to give you more supporting facts? You know? I don't know. I just feel like this should have been more of a conversation instead of this, like, you know, stabbing Caesar in the back as one sort of thing. So he pulls out this wand. It was the very weapon that Bakori had sought when he made his attempt to break into Skyhold's vault at midsummer. This will rip Havath City in half. I hope you know what you're doing, Alustin. And Alustin says, I'm doing what needs to be done. So they all get ready to leave, and he is not even being honest with them. Because the wand, it's not the tongue eater. I think the book that he has is the tongue eater. But it says he doubted the other librarian errants would agree with his plans to use it. They would all be content with merely destroying Havath City. But Alustin knew that wouldn't ever be enough. Havath's dream of order had to be wiped from the face of the planet. The multiversal manipulators behind its plans taught an absolute lesson. They'd failed horribly with the Ithonian Empire, and he was going to make sure their failure was even more complete with the Havath Dominion. So they aren't even aware what it is he's going to do. And the fact that he monologued to Kanderon, it's like, I don't know. It feels self-sabotaging. I guess he just really was sure she'd die before anybody got to talk to her. But he should have known that Bond was going to inform Hugh that she was being hurt and that he would come running. So I don't know. Maybe she played dead. So that is the end of the book, and I can't stop laughing that Alustin was essentially a double agent with Kanderon, and the people that he was double agenting with, he is double agenting also. What a slippery bitch. Like, Alustin, get a grip, dude. Seriously. I do appreciate having gotten to see him in battle so many times and how devastating his attacks are, because knowing that and going into this next book makes him just seem so much scarier, you know? And I really wonder what he's going to do going up against our friends, because he knows a lot of their weaknesses based on teaching them. And I'm not sure that they're going to have to find some things, like pull some new tricks out in order to surprise him. Ugh, I do not know. So yeah, that is the end of the book. And I can't wait to start Tongue Eater. I'm really fucking Alustin. All right. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm over time. I do want to mention too, at the end of this book on the audiobook, there's a preview chapter of another book that John Bierce wrote called The Rack, W-R-A-C-K. and I listened to it and really liked it. So I actually downloaded that audiobook because I'm going to listen to it. It's got a really different tone, which I found interesting. But all right, Beers, prolific guy. Yeah, Dan says lying is like breathing for Alustin. Indeed. MX Shard says, I like the setup of everything for this development. Slowly realizing Alustin is concerning to dangerous to an enemy. Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't like seeing people fight against people that they once considered friends. It sucks. And when we saw them be friends, it's even worse. It was like enough with Valia and him, and I never got to see them as friends. But we've got our guys, you know? I hate this for them. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. Thank you again to Dan for commissioning this. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.